You ever get to that point where things start to just become a little too predictable? And I guess I shouldn't probably start the conversation like this, because we're living in a relatively unpredictable time period, you know, in terms of, like, I just think that things are a little bit kind of wonky in terms of the way we run our, you know, run ourselves, run our government, you know, etc. You know, you could look at it and completely, you know, disagree with me, but I'm all for, like, the idea of fairness, okay? You know, i.e., if the rules apply to John, they should also apply to Jim and Aaron and Tommy and, you know, anyone who lives in the United States. I know I've just kind of given you sort of stereotypical English white names, but like everybody, I mean, like, you know, I don't want to start getting racist or anything and be like Ching Chong and Akbar, Almar Akbar, you know. But you know what I'm trying to get at is, you know, it should apply to everybody. So, you know, if and I understand things can differ from area to area, you know what I mean? So, for instance, if you live out in the desert, you're probably not too worried about flooding, okay? Or maybe you are, I don't know. I'm just sort of thinking in terms of my own area. You know, if you live by a creek bed, you know, and the creek has been known to flood before, you worry about it, too much rain coming down, it flooding again. And you worry about what's downstream to make sure that it doesn't flood, so it doesn't cause damage to you or your property. Okay, great. But if you live, say, in the mountains, you're probably not terribly concerned about flooding because you live on a mountain, but you'll probably be more concerned with something like a rock slide or getting snowed in or what have you, okay? So different areas have to take different precautions based on their environment and, you know, obviously the people and society that lives within those areas, okay? I get that. So there's going to be differences from county to county, state to state, country to country, you know? I get that. And what makes sense in one area probably wouldn't work in another, either because we're so culturally different or religiously different, or, you know, people are more religious, so they tend to accept this type of law versus some place that's more of like a I want to say atheist, that's probably not the right word, place that doesn't base their laws as heavily on religious or moral doctrine. But, like, in terms of, like, running a country, I have to feel that if you set a law in a portion of your country, like the United States or France or Germany or the United Kingdom or China or wherever, okay, and you set a law, that law should apply to everywhere, you know. And if you say, okay, we're going to give privileges to these people. Example would be, you know, say the soybean farmers in the United States are struggling because, you know, they weren't able to sell their most recent crop to, you know, out to China, so they need some help in terms of a bailout, so they don't all go bankrupt and lose their.
I'll live. I just as soon not owed you that, though. And don't call me Captain.
I don't like it. Makes me hurt. All right, I'll put that conversation on hold for just a second. We'll come back to it in a minute because there's a cutscene coming up, and I don't want to talk over it.
Thank you for your help back there. But don't think that got you any closer to the pirate's graveyard. Best be running back to your friends, boy. Rough seas tonight. You get along before the storm rolls in. Go home, or whatever it is you call it.
That's rough.
Now. That'll show him not to cross the buckram.
Fucking murdered that little girl in cold blood. Didn't do jack shit.
Smarts, don't it? Don't worry. The pain won't last. Don't you be afraid. You're gonna see your mama real soon.
That hurts.
They say history's got a way of repeating itself. That's the second little girl I've lost to war. Thought things would be different on land. You got an explanation for this, boy? You know what killed this little girl? Couldn't even speak if she saw something. Why'd she have to die?
Lives taken without reason. That's the world we live in. You know
Yep.
that as well as I.
All I know is stealing and killing. I'd shed a tear for the girl if I weren't guilty of worse myself.
Athelstan,
Don't you call me that.
then you decide who you are. Or you'll be stuck here, waiting for another bolt through your own back. As for me, I'm going to do what I can to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, a lot of killing of the innocents in this game. Alright, so when you go into the pirate's graveyard and you make it down to the 3rd level, which is this crystals area, you start the battle, then Athelstan, or whatever he's going to call himself, joins you in the battle, and then as long as he survives this battle, like every other recruitment battle, then you can recruit him.
It's going to be tough. Speak of the devil.
And mind you, if you missed any of those cutscenes earlier, this isn't possible.
You're headed into the graveyard deeps, aren't you? Best clear a path first.
I'm pretty sure you can't go any farther. There's like only like a certain level you go down in the pirate's graveyard before basically it says, I can't find any more paths, and it sends you back to the top. And I think only if you have Athelstan with you are you allowed to continue. And then ultimately, once you make it all the way down to the bottom or the top or whatever it's called of the graveyard, pirate's graveyard, will you find the treasure, quote unquote. I don't know what the treasure is per se. I know that you can choose to not take the treasure and then come back and get it later, and the game doesn't punish you for that in terms of your reputation.
That's why you abandoned your ship, threw away your sword. What made you change your mind?
I said later. Keep your eyes on the enemy. Let your gaze wander, and your life will be a short one.
Yeah, that's true. So Denham keeps poking and prodding at Athelstan as to what is he doing, and he's like, later, we'll talk about this later. Anyways, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, maybe I'm just whatever you want to call me. Insert political rhetoric term here, a bleeding heart, liberal, disgusting. I just don't I've always been a person who, okay, what are the rules? Okay, we're all gonna play by the same rules now, okay? No, you can't change the rules. We already established. Okay, you're gonna change the rules? Okay, just remember this for later on, because I'm gonna take advantage of the fact that you're fucking the rules over now. The kind of stuff just drives me wild. It's just it's a little bit of, you know, if you mix metaphor, I'm going to start mixing metaphors here, but it's kind of like a little bit of a Pandora's box. Once you open it, it's hard to put it back into the box. So one of the things we've always worried about is giving a particular branch of government, whether that be the executive, it's usually the executive, but it can also be the judicial branch, too much power. Sometimes it can be the legislative branch too, but it tends to be, we tend to complain more about the bureaucracy of the legislative branch and how there are, quote unquote, too many people in Congress, which if you're gonna take strict numbers, yeah, I guess there's too many people in Congress. But if you want to take the number of people they represent per person, not so much. Like, imagine for a second you have a state and the state has 1 million people in it, okay? And you have, say, 10 senators or something, okay? So each one of those 10 senators represents roughly 100,000 people, right? A lot of people, I know, a lot of people to represent, okay? But that's, you know, you're still, you know, and it would be hard to create a consensus amongst, I guess you could even argue it'd be tough to make consensus even of 1,000 people, let alone 100,000 people. But I think you can get a pretty good idea of the people that live in your state or your area and try to bring that, ideally, to, you know, Congress, the legislative, whatever you want to call it. But again, you know, we like, do we all play by the same rules? You know, is it okay for one state to, you know, because we have only so many House of Representative members, is it okay for a state like California for one representative there to represent almost 1 million people, whereas in Wyoming you're closer to 300,000 people per rep, including senators? It's kind of not the way the House was made, but you know, I understand, you know, the idea of expanding the House is like, I would probably have an easier time convincing you to drink poison, particularly if you're a small government person. And I get that. I get the fact that for every new member of Congress that you introduce, that's more money that you're spending, you know, taxpayer-wise to, you know, employ them, you know. And you could argue, well, we don't need that many people, you know, we can figure it out. But from a representation standpoint, I've always sort of been against that. I've always been more of like, okay, take the state with the least number of people in it, okay? That becomes your line for one person, okay? And because every state is represented by 2 senators and at least one member of the U.S. House of Representatives, you could take those 3 and divide the population by that number of people, okay? So each one of the representatives should cover that many people. Or you could just stick with just simply the House number, okay? So if, you know, Wyoming has, I don't know, let's say 500,000 people in it, okay? And that's the smallest state, okay? So you're now saying, without putting a specific number on it, that, you know, that each House of Representatives member should represent approximately 1 million people. I'm sorry, 500,000 people, okay? So you take that and you multiply it out and you see how many representatives should each state get based on this number, okay? So, you know, if you're a bigger state that has more people in it, you would get more representation than a smaller state. But that makes sense because you're doing a one-to-one analysis based on a number that you didn't arbitrarily pick. You didn't say, well, I want 100 members of Congress. I want 1,000 members of Congress. And we'll figure it out from there. You say, no, The population dictates the number of representatives each state has based on it. So if you have twice that number, or 1 million people, you would get 2 representatives. And if you had 2 million people, you'd have 4 representatives, et cetera, et cetera. And then you'd be able to properly divide up representation amongst the states, okay? And then, so, the reason why this works, I think this is a compromise in my mind anyways. I know it's bad right now, but I think it's a compromise in my mind because if you have a state like Wyoming, okay, that has 500,000 people, okay, and they remain the lowest state, but they double their population, and suddenly they become a state of 1 million people, okay, just as an example, okay. So now each representative is no longer 500,000, but 1 million people, because it's the lowest populated state, okay? So that means that if everybody is being represented by, is more evenly represented per state, then you end up with a situation where, not likely, but conceivably, you could get to a situation where instead of having 270 representatives, you might have, 200 representatives because the states are more evenly divided amongst population, you see. And in which case, you lower the number of people in your Congress. Now, I understand that's not a great solution because I'm basically saying, should one person represent 1 million people in, are people adequately being represented? And the answer to the question that many people in the United States feel is they're not optimally being represented in this country. Okay? So, options for that are, but my point I guess I should get to is that at least in that case, you're setting the way the rules work, and you're following the way the rules work so that everything is more equitable, okay? Well, right now we have 270 representatives. Everybody's guaranteed, or is it 270? It might be more than that. Anyways, everybody gets 1 representative per state. So right off the bat, you gotta take 50 off the board. And that leaves you with what? 100 and, I'm sorry, that's not right. Leaves you with like somewhere in the 220 range. So now you have 220 representatives that you have to split amongst the remaining states / population. So again, you end up in a situation where Texas and California and the bigger states are, in terms of their House percentage, underrepresented, but we accept that as the rule of law until we decide we don't want to play by those rules anymore. But what I don't like is when more recent example of gerrymandering stuff in the United States. It's okay. It seems like it's okay when some states gerrymander, but it's not okay when other states gerrymander because each state is represented by a different Supreme Court. So if this, say, came to the, the New York Supreme Court and they gerrymandered it heavily to the Democrats, they might go, well, this is fine. We're okay with this. We don't care about this. Whereas in Virginia, they looked at the maps that were elected by the people and they said, no, these are not, we can't use these maps. These maps are bad. Which, that brings up a different argument I don't want to get into about overruling the why did the people vote on a fucking referendum to gerrymander the state if the people they weren't going to respect the will of the voters? Don't put it to a vote if you don't want. And this has happened. I've seen this happen in other situations. Back in the late 90s, early 2000, there was a ballot measure that was placed for Pennsylvania. I wasn't able to vote at that point. I was too young. It was a ballot measure that would increase taxes by 1/2 cent. Okay? And it would be sort of an across-the-board tax for, I think it was like 3 to 5 years. Okay? And the proponents of the tax were people who wanted to see more money put into schools and communities and for services like that to increase. Well, the problem was this was also linked to helping fund the stadiums that were going up at that time, which were PNC Park and Heinz Field. And basically they ran it as a no stadium tax. Okay, the ballot measure got defeated pretty handedly, so they ended up not moving forward with that tax plan referendum. But the stadium still got pushed through, and the people in the state still ended up paying for those stadiums. So even though they said no, we're not doing this, the stadiums, they ultimately ended up taxing the people anyways. The only difference is there was no, you lost that ability to use that tax money for other community services as well, because it was set to cover not only the stadium itself, but anything above and beyond, because you can't predict necessarily how much revenue the tax is going to bring in. But the idea was they had estimated it would cover at least the stadiums, plus whatever remaining would go back into the communities for, maintenance of roads, services, or other things that people wanted done in their local community. So again, the way the government said was no, the state, the city, whatever said, no, we're going to put these stadiums in. There's not really much you can do about it. And yes, you are going to end up paying for them because we're going to raise taxes in a different way. We're not going to put on a ballot and ask you your opinion on it. We're just going to do it. So I don't like that. I don't like if you're going to agree to put a like for instance, I guess outside the United States, Brexit, okay? They put it on the conservatives ran on this idea that we're going to give the people the choice to leave or stay in the European Union, and they gave them that choice, and the people voted to leave the European Union, and then the conservatives, they said, okay, we've gotten a mandate from the people, we are going to do exactly what they want, which of course is kind of what the conservatives wanted anyways, but there's conservative doesn't necessarily mean one specific viewpoint. It might mean that in the United States, where everyone's got to, if you're a conservative, you have to bend to the whims of your party. And if your party says we're voting positive on this, you do it. And if they say you vote nay on that, you do that. There's levels of conservatism, particularly in the United Kingdom. And there is in the United States as well, but it just seems their previous prime minister says, okay, you guys can have this vote, but if you vote to leave the European Union, I'm resigning. And that's what he did. He said, I'm not gonna be the one steering the ship. You guys want to leave the EU, that's your business. Right, wrong, indifferent, I don't care, but I'm not going to be the one at the helm when this goes down, because I don't think this is a smart idea. But, don't give the people the right, the choice to vote on these things if you're not going to stick behind what they decide, good, bad, or indifferent. But I don't really understand. Is it okay? I don't like gerrymandering. I don't think it should be done at all. I think you should try to create as neutral maps as possible. So if you have, say, a percentage of, let's say you have, you have a population where, say, I don't know, 40% vote Democrat, 40% vote Republican, and the other 20% are independents, okay? So in an ideal situation, you would end up with a map where you try to properly represent the people, so that when everything's said and done, you have 20% Democrats, 20% Republicans, and then, the 20% that can go either direction, or can even go as to a non two-party, third-party system, okay? Let the people decide that, or conversely, every year in the primaries, instead of voting you kind of do it the opposite the way we do right now, which is in the primaries, you go to your local voting place, you are registered as a Democrat or Republican, and then you go and you vote for those people to run on your party's ticket. Okay? And then in November, you try to convince the people that are neutral to or, not, aren't red, red Republicans or blue Democrats or whatever, who only vote straight party. People that, vote sort of based on how they feel, how the candidates feel to them, what the issues are, what's important to them. I don't know. But if you did the opposite, where in the primary, you voted for your party, so you have 30% people, like I said, 40% of the people voted for Democrats, 40% voted for Republicans, etc. Or say it's closer to more like a 50-50, so like, say a 48-52 split, something like that. In the fall, instead of you voting for, you're voting for your party's candidates in the fall.
Finally. To the landlocked, a pirate is nothing more than a scoundrel, an outlaw who takes gold and lives. The landlocked can keep their precious laws. The sea is free. Upon her waves, all are one people. If you ask me, it's them who are the scoundrels. Runway, Balbatos, Brenton, dung heaps, the lot of them. I'm a pirate. I know no other life.
I'm not exactly sure if this was written to basically fit anywhere in the storyline, and they decided to keep him towards the end of the game. Because when you mention in Chapter 4, you're mentioning Runway and Balbatos at this point, I feel like you're,
I can help you right this land. And write new laws.
I feel like there's something missing here. Because they're both dead by Chapter 4.
If that's your decision.
You might have taken the high road, risen above the bloodshed. But I'm already in it up to my boots. Come to think of it, we're not so different. You raise Justice's flag on high with red-stained hands, boy. But I don't need the young ones to walk in my wake. The sea is good. The sea is free. But a fertile field, that's the good life, eh?
Then let us end this war together.
Ha! Good choice.